What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Mikey Richardson of JackKnifeDesign.com. He's got a business partner, Michael. So I'm calling him Mikey today. And you go by Mikey anyways. So
yes, I do. Thank you.
I'm loving it. Before I formally introduce you, Mikey, I always like to point out other episodes. So some other episodes to check out of the podcast. Mikey's been doing this thing for a long time. Since the 90s, I believe. I had Kevin Hurrigan, who is founder of Spinutech, who also started his agency in 1995. And he talked about the kind of evolving landscape in business, in agency space, in digital space. It was a really interesting interview, and this one will be much the same. Very interesting. Another one was interesting, Mikey, since it's part of the Top Agency series. Adee Clevitt, I interviewed. She specializes in SOPs. So she has like a easy button for a company create SOPs. So she goes in and helps companies document procedures, the sexy stuff that actually makes businesses work, from streamlining client onboarding or staff onboarding or just any operational procedures in general. So that was an interesting episode because we geeked out on our favorite productivity tools and systems and processes, and check those out and more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships. And how do we do that? We actually do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. And we do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. So, Mikey, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company. So, they can create amazing relationships and amazing content and actually run their business. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you definitely should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com to learn more. And I'm excited to introduce Mikey Richardson. He's co-founder of Toronto-based Jacknife Agency. They can be found at JackKnifeDesign.com. And they're a brand agency that aims to help organizations build value through the power of creativity. He's an art school grad who I was mentioning. He started a company in 1996. So Kevin has you beat by 1 year, but not a competition here. And that business later became Jacknife in a merger. And he just really tossed himself into this world of entrepreneurship. I'm wondering, from art school, what did you actually think you were going to do? And we'll get into that. But they've worked with companies like Nike, Jackson Triggs Wine, Toronto's FC, the professional soccer team there, and many, many more. So Mikey, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Excited to be here. Yeah.
So what did you think, and we'll talk about Jacknife, but what did you think you were going to do when you went to art school?
Honestly, I got into art school because, even in high school, I was, really interested in creativity, making art, drawing, painting, those sorts of things. Had an instructor give me some guidance around, potentially I could become an illustrator, like a way to apply that into a career might be illustrating books or magazines. So I applied to art school, got in there. And the whole plan was I was going to do drawings and paintings for either children's books or, magazines. One of my dreams was to work with Rolling Stone or Ray Gun, back in the 90s, big music magazines. And I always imagined this life of sort of the solitary painter, we're living and working in a loft studio, making paintings and faxing my ideas to clients. And then very quickly, just, through the art school experience, you get exposed to all these different types of things that you can do, different types of people, different ways of thinking. I was introduced to graphic design. I was aware I'd seen lots of graphic design. I was into skateboard culture and reading magazines and those sorts of things, but I never really thought about it. So started meeting students who were studying graphic design, and I saw how they worked, it was less about this is the style of work that I do, and it was more about solving problems, using a methodology, a process to, take on a brief, solve a challenge, work with other people oftentimes. And I started to really get into this idea of collaborating and working with different types of people. Around the same time, computers were becoming a thing in our industry, moving away from manual processes, and that was creating these opportunities and ways to create new things. And towards the end of my art school experience, I just started thinking, maybe there's something else. Maybe there's a way I could collaborate with other people. Then we had this bizarre opportunity arise where, through a friend of a friend, we're presented with this possibility of creating a music video for a band here in Canada that was signed to Universal.
Was this the first big account?
Well, it was sort of, we were still
Something different.
students.
Okay,
Yeah, we
you're
were
still students.
and the music label gave us this opportunity to do a stop motion animated music video. Of course, we didn't know how to do that, so it required getting together a bunch of different types of art school students and creative thinkers, figuring out how to do it. Being creative, writing a script, making models and sets, and it just became this whole experience where I fell in love with working with and collaborating with other people. So, this was as we were ending art school, and then started thinking with my now business partner Mike, like maybe we can keep doing this. He was a graphic design student. We thought, maybe we can start a company or a collective or some kind of we didn't even know, like we just really didn't know what we didn't know, but we knew that we loved working with other creative people and maybe this could become a thing. So
we'll get to the first big account, but what was the band? Do you remember the band name?
The band is called the Gandharvas. Yeah.
Okay.
So they had a few hits here. I think they may have got some radio play on sort of college radio south of the border. Yeah, it was a great experience, sort of 90s rock grunge,
Whenever I think of music in Canada, I think of Nardwuar. Do you know Nardwuar?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, do.
Amazing. If someone hasn't checked out his stuff, so here's Nardwuar.
There he is. Yeah.
He has some of the most. Have you watched his interviews before?
Oh yeah. Like
amazing
to see him all the time for sure. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. People should check it out. Here's his website here, but he's interviewed some of the top musicians of all time, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a
he was
favorite
coming up.
Yeah,
it was the same time. We were literally 2 blocks from Much Music where they used to shoot. So
did you ever meet him?
No, I've never met him.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Super interesting. Anyways, tell about the first big account. What got you launched into this agency world?
Sure. So we came out of school. We met with a couple of other business grads who were recently out of school. We started a small company, started peddling our student portfolios, basically combining the work of Mike and myself and trying to get meetings to show, a big portfolio case to people and try and land work. And, we had already done this music video, so we had a bit of an entryway to the music industry and started doing some small record label work and promotional things, album cover packages, that sort of stuff. And then I guess, word got around that, we were, had a young shop and we were doing some interesting creative stuff. And we threw a few art parties and, we would try to gain as much momentum.
What did an art party look like? What were you doing?
So we would create our own artwork, so large scale paintings, projected works. We were really interested in experimenting with, new ways of creating artwork. We'd bring in other artists, whether it be photographers, painters, whatever, rent out a big warehouse space, get a DJ, throw a big party, promote it within the sort of creative community in Toronto. So we do that fairly often and started getting a bit of, notoriety for that. And so word got around.
That's smart. That's a super smart thing to do.
Yeah, it was sort of old school self promotion, right? Like the way we looked at it was like a band, right? We'll start playing at bars. We'll do our own gigs. We'll put up posters and try to get a following, right? So word got around, and YTV, which is a children's channel, sort of like Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network in Canada. they were looking for a new advertising agency, so they approached us to come and pitch. We had literally never competitively pitched for an account. We weren't even sure what that entailed. So we went in for a briefing, and it was a creative shootout, they call it. Here's a brief, go away for, I think it was a couple of weeks, and come back with your best work, right? So
How does that work? Is that like a paid thing, or are you just pitching for the work?
in those days, it was just competitive, so it wasn't paid. I think most of the pitches now are, so there's some kind of a compensation if you're going to be doing that speculative work. You know, we certainly,
because that's a lot of work. You go back
yeah,
a couple of weeks, you're pouring your heart into it, and then you're also giving a company very good ideas as well.
100%. In the late and it was very common in the late 90s. It's become more of a faux pas now, for sure. And you know, we typically don't participate in those sorts of things. We try to keep it more credentials based, right, when you're pitching. But back then it was creative shootout, like who's got the best idea and we're gonna pick, right? So we went in, and they had this new strategic positioning and a tagline, which was keep it weird. And we thought, well, no problem, right? Like we definitely have that part dialed. So again,
we're going to dominate this.
We're going to dominate this. So like you said, we went back and we just resourced the heck out of it. Like we were a small company, maybe 5 or 6 people at that point, and we just put everyone on it. Like let's do the best we can. So we had to create a transit ad, wide open. How do you interpret keep it weird, targeting an audience of children, right? Tweens. So we went away, came back after a couple of weeks. We went to their building to pitch. We'd never done a formal pitch, like I said. We were too unaware to even be nervous, I would say. We just didn't really know, right? So, you know, we always say we get in there, we're sitting in this waiting room and feeling fine. And then the doors open and our competitors come out having just pitched. And it's like people in business suits and, you know, proper portfolio cases. And, you know, at that point you'd bring your own digital projector, and we're like, oh no, like we have our stuff glued to a piece of foam core in a garbage bag, literally in a garbage bag. Because
I picture like science fair, you know, like the old school science fair projects.
Yeah, 100%. And like we're dressed like high school or college art students, right? With our garbage bag of ideas. And we go in, you know, we didn't, I don't think I'd ever use the word credentials in that context. So we just go in and take our workout. Here's what we did, started talking about the work. Why does it look this way? We found out that it turns out we misinterpreted the brief. We did the wrong format. We were supposed to do one format. We did the other. So, you know, textbook, absolutely the wrong way to pitch. So we left, and, you know, we ended up winning the count. Wow. And I found out later, you know, became close friends with the clients, the creative director there. And they said that, you know, I guess the room was probably split. You know, who are these guys? They really don't have experience. But the other more creative minded folks were like, no, they really get it. They get the brief, they get the audience, they can deliver on creativity. And they gave us a shot. So, you know, this was a huge thing for us, right? It gave us the ability to really professionalize what we were doing and start building our company and build a portfolio. And, you know, certainly having a retainer client as an ad agency was a huge milestone for us. So.
I mean, what's weirder than coming in when everyone's portfolio than a garbage bag? I mean, they should have just not even had to look at your pitch. Like they're in.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things though. At the time, it didn't really sink in just how strange that was. We were just doing it's for us. It was just like, it's about the work, right? It's not about us. It's not about our presentation. It's about the work. You know, now that I look back, I mean, I'm sure the competitors, had they really thought about it, must have thought we were a complete joke, right? But you know, it was about the work, it turns out.
There's a story I had on, it's funny you mentioned that, Mikey. So I had on a comedian, Elon Gold, on the podcast, and one of his dreams was to be on Saturday Night Live, and he tried out for Saturday Night Live, and he saw this other person come out who looked kind of goofy. He's like, I'm competing this person, and it was Will Ferrell who he was talking about. So I guess you're like the Will Ferrell of this pitch. You come out and, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, it's not the first time that it's happened to me either. Like you go through a similar experience when you're trying to get into art school too, right? You show up on portfolio day, you spread out your work, you hope they like it, and you see all of your competitors like trying that you're up against, right? And it's hard to sort of separate yourself from the crowd and not be comparative. And so it was, this is pre-social media, so that was kind of getting into art school was like my first exposure to going, oh, how do I measure up against all these other people? And oh, they look more creative, they look more stylish, they look smarter than I do, right? Like,
It's always a little bit more intimidating when you're looking at the competition than
yeah,
focusing on our own stuff. I mean, that's kind of what social media has done too. Like if you go out and start, I find
100%.
like start judging myself on like other people's stuff, that's like a recipe for disaster.
100%. And that, I mean, you see it in business too, right? Like, you're always looking at competitors and you're going, well, what are they doing? And they must have some secret sauce. And how did they get this client? And then how we must be inadequate. And you start to go down this rabbit hole of like kind of negative thinking versus going, celebrating and recognizing the things that you're doing well. And, focusing, sticking to your vision and saying, this is what we do and we're going to do it well. And we are doing it well. Right.
So that first milestone client, how do you think about pricing at this point?
Right. That was a super tough. Like we had no idea. Right. So back then we had to put together a scope for like an AOR, right? Like a monthly retainer. And I kid you not, we didn't know what an AOR even was, agency of record, right? Like we had to ask around, right? So I remember back at the time we had friends who had launched careers in advertising. And so we kind of asked around, like, what do you know what your agency would charge on this? In Canada, in Ontario, we have an organization called RGD, the Registered Graphic Designers, and they publish some reports on industry norms for fees and those sorts of things. So we started looking at like how many hours do we think we're going to spend on this? What's a reasonable hourly fee? I mean, we don't charge hourly, but started thinking about what does that look like? And then we went, and it's similar to what we do now. We went back to the client with a model, like this is what we're thinking. Then there's a bit of negotiation back and forth. We built in some checkpoints, like let's check in every couple months and see, do both parties feel like it's fair, and we can adjust from there. And it was just like kind of open conversation. I think we've tried to maintain that to this day. Like we try to work with people to figure out that kind of fair value, right? Like here's what we think. What are you thinking? Let's talk about it, right?
What was the timeline of the project that you were projecting? How long was it going to take?
So the launch, we had a couple months to develop, I believe, all the creative for launch. So there was like, some established media that was going out, both internal and external. And then from once it was launched, with they had to do a full on-air package, right? They had a creative team that did all the broadcast things, and we were doing all the more print-based work. Once we got past launch, then we flipped over into more of a maintenance relationship where we're just like ongoing for the next, couple years doing all of the advertising communications. So I don't know if you remember TV Guide, full page ads in TV Guide and all the different local magazines and outdoor advertising, all that sort of stuff. And this is when web, I remember their first website was built during this period, right? So, web and digital communications were just really kind of starting. And, we'd make things like banners and, things that we'd never even heard of before. It was kind of at that point in time, So it was we worked with them for probably 2.5 or 3 years of essentially maintenance work.
Talk about the evolution of your services. It sounds like it hasn't changed that much. I could be wrong. But like in the beginning, you were going
Yeah.
in and you were pitching branding and design ideas. How has the services you deliver evolved?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think because of the way in which uh, were founded between, Mike being a graphic designer and myself being more of an illustrator or painter, it kind of set the tone early that we were going to do things a little bit differently. So a lot of design agencies at the time were doing your traditional services like brand strategies, logos, visual identity systems, like the graphic designy stuff, right? But because had come at it from this sort of art angle, and Mike, my partner being a musician and us working on a, video together, we had this early mindset, like we could apply this creative thinking to kind of anything. Like, yeah, let's do an ad, or, we just had an art show. We could do an event for a client, right? Like, let's use our creativity to make stuff. So you're right. Early on, we were doing this broad set of things, and that hasn't really changed. It's, certainly gotten better, bigger, more professionalized, but we still have that, like, we'll get it done kind of mentality, right? And still work with people, ideally within the company, but also external partners. If it's something we can't do, we're going to find the right people to team up with and get it done, right? And that's just been that's our culture, is like, we want to make stuff. We want to be challenged. We like it when someone comes to us with something we've never done before, and we kind of dig in and figure out, how do we do that? Who, not how, right? Who can teach us? Who can we lean on? How can we, bring together the right team?
Yeah. If you are, by the way, Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan have a bunch of great books, Who Not How being one of them.
Right.
I just read The Gap in the Gain, I think it's called, which is fantastic. And if you're listening only, I am pulling up the website here. We're looking at jackknifedesign.com. It'd be kind of criminal if I didn't show your website. We're talking about design here, and we're just talking heads. But so you could take a look at this, and I want to talk about your process.
Sure.
Because when we talk creativity, it's a blank canvas. You could do anything, and that's kind of scary in my mind. But you do have a process about it, and you can see the website. You could say, I love how you do this, by the way, on your website. As you're scrolling down, you have the strategy part, establishing the core, 2, design, 3, content. And I want to know if you actually do have an album that's Mikey Mike and the Gang. But talk about your process for a second.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting that our process echoes our deliverables, right? So, we don't have a proprietary, this is the process that we use. We use, the Googleable, if that's a term, creative process, right? So lots of different ways in which it's described, but essentially it's like, you start with really truly identifying the problem. Because sometimes when a client comes to us, the problem they're articulating isn't really the problem. Somebody's got to dig a little bit deeper and find out, what are we actually up to? Then you've got that sort of discovery mode, where you're saturating yourself with as much information as you possibly can, research, interviews, all the sorts of things. We're digging up information, and that's part of our think or strategy phase, right? It could be audience profiling, all those sorts of tools. Then we get into like incubation, right? Which is the kicking around ideas, doing experiments. That's when things start synthesizing, and we have different group and brainstorming tools to start bringing together, filtering, editing, synthesizing ideas, and then you get into making stuff, right? So you beta test something, you make a product, you revise, and then ultimately when you're done, you go to launch. And that's kind of, we don't own that process. I mean, the reason I point out that we don't own it is a lot of agencies love to sort of skin it and say, we've developed this unique thing. We haven't. We use the creative process, right? And because we do so many different things from a deliverables perspective, we try to break it down into these 3, right? So there's all that strategic foundational stuff, the who you are, what do you stand for. The make is design, typically what you think of from a design company, logos, brand guides, those sort of stuff. And then talk is, the ways in which we connect brands to audiences now is like limitless, from social content, websites and events, experiences, products, you name it, right?
So is this a real thing right here? Mikey Mike and the Gang?
No, it's fake. It's just
okay. I'm like, I gotta go listen to this.
If you go to our Spotify, we just sort of curated some playlists. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. You mentioned what's really the problem. And sometimes what someone puts in front of you is not really the problem. You have to dig a little bit. I don't wonder if there's an example you can share of, because this is a great example in general of working with clients and getting, because sometimes they express their problem in one way, but they feel understood when we actually dig deep in what's the real problem. So what would be an example when you think back of what a client said, here's the problem, but when you dug, you found what the real problem was underneath?
Yeah, maybe right off the top of my head, there'd be worked with a company called Woolwich Dairy, which is a goat dairy, right? And they'd been around. Started by a family in the 1980s. Just really kind of started at a small scale, producing premium goat dairy products. Um, and they built a brand. They had a level of success. Um, they were ultimately acquired by a larger company, and then um, we were approached with the original sort of challenge of needing to rename the company, rebrand it, make it something else. Great products, but it needs a new brand, right?
Yep.
So, we kind of went, well, that's great. We love naming companies. We love doing new brands. Those are things that we do and we enjoy doing. But we sort of thought, well, is that really the problem? Like, is it really the name and the brand that is an issue here? So started some digging, researching, learning about the company, its products, went to the farms, met the farmers, played with the goats, talked to consumers across the country. And really it was about what we discovered was the challenge wasn't, the name and the brand identity. It was more what this was at the core, the quality of the products, the great stories, the passion that goes into it. That wasn't coming across to the consumer, right? It was, to be honest, maybe kind of just a commodity goat dairy product.
There
There
you
was
are with the goat, by the way.
yeah, that's me. Yeah. There's no like emotional connection to like this really kind of honest company that's making really great products, right? And these like people who actually genuinely hand care for these goats and love them, right? So it just wasn't really projecting, it wasn't truly reflecting what the brand was at the core. We didn't need to change the brand. We just needed to better communicate to people. And we thought, you know, do we need, it doesn't need a name change. We developed some new names. We developed some sort of beta test new brands and logos and all that sort of stuff. And we tested that with consumers. And basically discovered no, we don't need to change a lot of these things. We just need to communicate better, right? And with some small tweaks, adjustments here and there, some better storytelling, and there you have it, right? But we could have made a mistake, could have made a big mistake of, renaming the brand and redoing everything just to give it a fresh start. And I think we would have lost a lot of what they had worked hard to establish since the mid 80s,
I love it. And if you're looking at this with some cool, you see those little logos of whatever on things, and you can see you've kind of made some of these special logos for them and their brand.
Yeah, it's a fun brand. I mean, it's pretty crazy how, when someone really does care about the product that they make, how that comes through. I remember um, we were first in one of their plants where they're making the cheese, and someone had made just a photocopied sign and stuck it to the door, one of the staff members, and it just said, "We feed people." And we just thought that really resonates, right? Like it was a honest to goatness company. And that's ended up becoming their tagline, right? Like it's just really truly honest people that care, and that needed to come through.
Love it.
Yeah.
So you had the first big, thanks for sharing that and what was really the problem. Because that really, if you would have gone down that route, it would have taken you on and the company on a different path that maybe it would have
Absolutely.
been completely unnecessary and wouldn't have served their actual needs. What was another major milestone of the company for you?
For Woolwich or for
No, for you
Jackknife?
at Jacknife. Yeah.
Um, I would say a huge milestone for us was uh in 2006, around 2006, 2005. We'd been working away since 96, doing our thing, small boutique agency. And all of a sudden we started getting getting these calls from big agencies, right? Saying, hey, design's a thing. So, you know, we were always talking about design and brand and those sorts of things, but it wasn't really like a big boardroom topic, design thinking, right? Until, you know, mid 2000s. I think the Rotman School here in Toronto was a big part of that. And just, you know, design thinking became a topic. And we started to understand that, you know, there is some value here building for what we're doing. So we're approached by agencies. A lot of people wanted to either team up with us, questions around acquisition. There was a big pitch here at the time for one of the big telcos for Rogers. And we were approached by multiple big agencies who were pitching that account, and there was a design component. They needed a team up. So we got called in to pitch on a few. And for us, it was just a call that like, hey, this is something valuable that we can build on. So we started having conversations, and we ended up, you know, through a series of months of convos, ended up selling a majority stake in the business. So we partnered with an ad agency here called John Street, did lots of great work with them, kind of, you know, grew our business, sort of, you know, gave us access to some tools that we didn't have before, even simple things like a full finance department and HR, and just like really helping us to make our business even better. Access to new clients, new people. And so you know, that was a big game changer for us, right? We're in a 6-year relationship with them. Ultimately, they were acquired by a multinational, and so at that point, we exited and went back to being independent again. But it was a huge shifting point for us, right? As a
What did
business.
your role change after the, I don't know if you call it acquisition?
Yeah, it was big shift. Like I previously, you know, I'd come out of art school. I didn't have access to really how other people are doing things. So creative person thrust into a role of being creative, but also helping to do sales and being a manager and all these things all at once. It's really difficult to navigate, right? So being part of a bigger entity, I could start seeing how other people do it. I could start learning from other people. I could work with their senior leadership, their president, and sort of learn things. We were exposed to, you know, back to pitching. How does a group like that do it? You know, learn some things there in terms of the tools and techniques that they use, which, you know, helped me grow as a business person, as a salesperson. Really great connection with their finance department, understanding really the mechanics of how do you properly run a business. Huge learning for us, you know. In fact, we still work with someone who was in a part of the finance, leading the finance team back in those days. So yeah, just like I would say it in terms of like professionalism and my own knowledge and ability as a business person, I learned enormously through those 6 years for sure.
Did you still, when they acquired you, did you still maintain ownership stake, a
Yeah,
percentage ownership stake?
they had a majority stake, and then we hung on to shares. Yeah, and then when they came to us and said there's this opportunity, either maybe there's a way to join us, or maybe you go back to independence, then we purchased back all those shares. Yeah.
So when they sold again, did you participate in that
No,
particular
that was
exit?
when we left. So we were out on the street, right? So we left, separated the companies. It was separate P&L, so they're separate businesses
So
as it
you had
were.
an option, did you have an option to, at that point, was it a decision to break off independent or go into this larger entity?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, it was tabled like, there was no firm like, no firm offer to join the multinational, but it was like, do we want to have a conversation about seeing if you can be part of this, you know, as a separate company, or do you want to go separate? And we decided to go the separate way.
Mm.
It came down to, um, a lot of it was like life stage, right? Just sort of, no, we love being independent. We like doing what we do. Let's go back to that. You know, we've learned a lot here. Let's move on and see what we can build now, right?
Was that a tough decision at that point? Because I feel like, I don't know if there was like money and equity involved. Like if they purchase you, then you can take chips off the table again and roll something in,
Yeah,
or
yeah. It was a hard decision, and because at this point in time, you know, we were young, but we did have responsibilities, right? Mortgages, families, building families. And so it's different than when you're starting a company out of art school. You know, I think I was 21 years old. I didn't have a ton of responsibilities, right? So to kind of launch yourself back into that world, while you're starting a family it's a hard decision, right? Because it's not just, you're not just thinking about yourself. You start to question, like, can I do this again? Do we have what it takes? So yeah, it's definitely a tough decision.
From the first acquisition, though, you were able to take some chips off the table at that time, it sounds like.
Yeah.
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 I had an interview with Todd Taskey. People should check out. He helps pair private equity with agencies and helps sell agencies.
Okay.
And you're familiar with this because of your experience. And sometimes he talks about, he has a second bite podcast where sometimes people make more on the second bite than they do on the first because they sell the private equity. Then the private equity sells again. And like you said, they take some chips off the table. They maintain some amount of equity. And that sometimes when the equity, they sell again, the equity could be worth more the second time since they've maybe acquired several companies and have a larger EBITDA that they're selling. So it's just an interesting model.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that it was a model that we had pre-planned. Well, I know it wasn't a model that we pre-planned, but it worked out, right? So, and I mean, that's the funny thing. We felt like in our, whatever, 27 years now, we've been through so many different iterations and ups and downs and economic environments that it's been a crazy ride for sure. And shortly after leaving, then we were in conversation with our accountant, and we had a friend who had a related company that we went to school with. He was an industrial designer, and we had done work together and started talking about maybe there's a way we could combine efforts and merge companies. And then the accountant said, funny you should say that. I have another client who's looking to do a merger. And we orchestrated this merging of three companies.
Wow.
And that's when we became Jacknife. That was, we came up with a new name. We just, all three of us had our own brands. We had our own levels of success and brand equity, but we thought, let's just start over. Four partners, new brand. Let's just start it all over again and combine forces. So we did that in 2013.
That sounds super stressful. Talk about some of the.
And I had my second child at the exact same time. So yeah, while trying to find where are we going to put this thing, we just moved out of a space, right? Like we're no longer part of the big agency. Where do we live? Let's do a merger. Let's have some kids. Like just do it all at once, right?
What were some, at that point, the services of the different companies? Were they complementary? Were they similar?
Yeah. So our company, we were called Amoeba Corp. And so we were, brand agency, design company.
That's hilarious. You're just a little amoeba? Is that what
a little amoeba? Yeah. But we put corp on the end to make it feel more, like a proper corporation, right? And so one of the companies we merged with was a direct competitor. So we were fighting over business, definitely. And then the other, like I said, was a friend who was in a related business as an industrial product designer. So he came, great point of collaboration. He was designing all kinds of interests, snowboard bindings and, vacuums and all kinds of cool stuff. And we were on the brand side. So it was a natural collab. And then, merging with the competitor was the other part of it. So
what's a learning from the merger perspective that maybe you wish you would have known?
I mean, you learn from everything, I guess. One of those things was like, doing a sale or acquisition or merge is always going to be difficult when you're, especially in, I think maybe especially in a culture-based industry where, personalities are such a big part of it, right? And creativity. So we knew that was going to be difficult, merging these three different cultures together. I feel like the biggest learning for me, I would say was just, I think some of the decisions were maybe made out of fear because we had just left a relatively cozy relationship. We were looking for a studio space. We weren't sure how it was all going to work. A little bit hitting panic, right? Oh, we got to figure something out. And we got to figure it out fast. I got a baby on the way, right? And so, I mean, I'm absolutely happy we did all this, but I feel like, some of the decisions were just kind of rushed and a little bit based in fear because, we've got to do something. We've got to act fast, right? But like they say, right, being decisive and making a call is sometimes better than, overthinking it, right? So
What would you this it's super interesting your path with this. What would you have done differently with the integration, whether someone's buying or merging? I know the integration itself is a difficult thing.
that's tough. Yeah.
Looking back, what would you have done differently knowing what you know now with the integration portion?
I think a big part of that is um time. Like we did it so fast, right? It just happened very, very quickly. It didn't give us enough time to, do a great job of communicating what we were doing. I'm speaking mostly internally with like all the different people involved, making sure everyone understands the plan or lack of plan, and making sure we're bringing people along for the ride, involving people. Wish we would have, maybe had some time to like better work with our teams to help make decisions or help figure out how we were going to do certain things. It really was like led by shareholders combining our things, and then sort of like, communicating that to all these other people involved, right? Important staff members, people we're working with. And like I said, it worked out, but I wish it would have been a little bit more methodical, a little bit more thoughtful and considered over a longer period of time. But we did have realities. We had to make it happen. So yeah.
It's interesting because I know the companies have different processes, especially if
Yeah.
one of them was a direct competitor. So they have certain ways of probably pitching something and processing something. You have a different way. How did you end up coming to a joint process, I guess you could say, so that it was streamlined across the company? Maybe that took years. I don't know.
Yeah, it did. It took a lot of time, and it took a lot of constant attention, a lot of conversation, a lot of back and forth. We had when you have shareholders that are used to being more independent, making their own decisions, that it can be tough when all of a sudden you're in a co-decision making mode, right? And so yeah, it was hard. Like lots of like comparing and contrasting, and I think that drew, the first couple of years were tough because a lot of energy was poured into how are we doing things, and sort of managing internal opinions versus just getting it done, right? So yeah, it was hard. Like, and again, all of these things arise after we'd merged, right? So let's put it together. Okay, now what? How are we going to figure this out, right? Which I'm honestly, it's like sometimes I think, had we said, oh, we're going to maybe stretch this out and think it all through, I don't know if it ever would have happened, right? Like we kind of, it's the
Yeah.
same as when we first started out of art school. We rented a studio space and we didn't have a client. We thought, well, we're doing this. This is what's going to happen. We're in a company now. Now let's figure it out. And this is, again, we did the same thing. We're a merged company now. We're a new thing. Let's start sorting it out, right?
So, Mike, how'd you land Nike as a client?
Um, Interesting. So we had done some work with Nike Canada prior to the project you're showing now. So we had done some retail communications for the, different Nike stores, and Foot Locker and Athletes World and those sorts of things in Canada. That slowly transitioned into doing some event work. So we did a big sort of art party for them called the Art of Speed, and then started doing these like branding and doing, creative work around these one-off events. So we built a bit of a portfolio, but then randomly we were approached by Nike out of Portland. So they have a division there that's completely concerned with workspace design. So all the different Nike workspaces globally. So to this day, I don't know how they found us. May have been just on a simple Google search, or maybe through word of mouth within the organization. I'm not sure, but it was a separate relationship. They came to us and said, we're getting a new headquarters in Canada. We, certainly want to tell the story of the Nike brand, but we want to localize it. Like, let's look at Nike through a Canadian lens in this new HQ. So they
So you have
decided.
beer and hockey all over it?
What's that?
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, that with beer and hockey. Yeah. Well,
Right.
it's funny though. There's executions where, we're focused on like the landscape and snow and having fun with some of those stereotypes for sure. Like the wood executions that you saw earlier on, the strips, those are all made of maple.
This,
Lots
yeah.
of different subtle ways to do it, right? Yeah, so it was really about, bringing this space to life through branded executions or interactions, as we call them. throughout the entire headquarters. And this kind of happened, so I think maybe the second big environment we had done, we had done Mondelez headquarters in Canada prior to this, again,
They're
which was,
huge.
yeah, it was someone saying, "Hey, is this something you guys can take on?" And we said, "Yeah, we'll figure it out." And it kind of builds, right? So we do Mondelez, and then Nike calls, and then people start seeing this work, and it's a kind of a niche. There's not a lot of folks to do it, and it's led to many projects since. Like we did Fabletics headquarters in Los Angeles.
It's amazing.
It's a really fun space to work. I mean, understanding a brand, creating these interactive kind of art pieces, and then bringing it to life in a big 3D space. It's a unique challenge for sure.
Wow. This is huge undertaking. I can't imagine. How long did this type of project take?
Oh, geez, I'm trying to think back. It's one of those projects where honestly you lose track of time because there's so many late nights and pizzas and working sessions. But I'm gonna say it's probably a 4 or 5 month process. Maybe a bit.
Wow. I was thinking 4 or 5 years. That's
No,
short. Holy cow.
It was pretty. This was particularly rapid, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's months long and like energy intensive. You've got a big team on it. High stakes. I mean, they're a very famous brand, obviously, and working with their workspace design division, that like these people are really good at what they do, right? And so it was an amazing experience.
Wow. Mikey, this is amazing. I have one last question for you. Before I ask it, I want to just point people to check out jackknifedesign.com to learn more. And just thanks for sharing your lessons and stories. My last question is just some of your favorite resources. Resources could be your favorite books that you learned for business. It could be a mentor that you learned from. What are some of your favorite resources that you can share with us?
Honestly, thinking back to when I was mentioning in 2006, understanding this, design thinking becoming a big thing, I started reading a lot of Tom Peters books. Just love his writing style, love the way he's breaking things down. It became, educational for me, but in helping me to better articulate the things that I intuitively knew, right? And then I could better communicate to our clients what we were doing and why that brings value. So, I mean, definitely a standout for me in terms of authors would be Tom Peters. I'm constantly absorbing books on just like creativity and art process and technique and things unrelated to brand or design, but things more about like the creative process. So his name's escaping me. Music producer just released the book on creativity.
Oh yes. I know. I'm gonna look it up right now. It just released like a few months. Rick Rubin.
Yeah, Rick Rubin's book. It's amazing. It's so inspirational. Just little tidbits. Things.
The Creative Act. That was the book.
Creative Act.
Yeah.
Amazing book. Mike and I, we're constantly digging into history. So we're pulling ideas and inspirations from flea markets, from art history. I love to travel galleries. I was in Austria in this time last year, just like going to galleries and pulling ideas and inspirations from the work there. And I find that, I try to avoid really contemporary publications because I find, we're always recycling who's doing what. And I try to tune out of that to a degree and kind of dig into the past a bit more. So
love it.
Music, constantly inspired by music.
I just want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone should check out Jacknife Design, more episodes of the podcast, and we'll see everyone next time. Mikey, thanks so much.
Amazing. Thank you.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.